I was 58 years old the November my son told me Wyatt's hockey tournament was a family thing, and I found out what that meant 2 days later, sitting alone at my kitchen table in Timmins, scrolling through photographs on Facebook that told me exactly who counted and who didn't. 3 weeks after that, driving through the boreal forest north of Sudbury on a highway that cuts through granite and spruce, and the kind of silence that makes the city people nervous. 19 missed calls stacked up on my phone like a tower. Nobody saw coming, all from my son. The same one who had just explained, very patiently, that there wasn't quite room for me and his family this season. But before I take you there, let me step back, because none of this makes sense without knowing who I was to that boy, before someone decided I wasn't useful anymore. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't yet, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it where you are? I'd genuinely love to know who's sitting up with me, because what I'm about to tell you took me 58 years to live and about 10 seconds of quiet on a frozen highway to finally understand. My wife Bette died 11 years ago, pancreatic cancer. She was 44. Our son Corey was 17. His sister Angie was 14. One September Bette had what we all thought was a bad back. By December we knew. By the following February she was gone. The kind of loss that doesn't feel real, even when you're standing at the graveside in the cold. I was a journeyman electrician, had been for 20 years at that point. After Bette passed, I picked up every overtime shift the company offered, Saturdays, some Sundays. I drove an hour each way to job sites and never once mentioned the cost of it because the kids didn't need to carry that. What they needed was to stay in the house they grew up in, stay in their schools, keep as much of their normal as I could hold together. So that's what I made sure happened. Corey played AAA hockey from the time he was 10. Equipment, registration, tournament travel. The bills came in the way they do when a kid is serious about a game. There was one year I pulled $12,000 out of my RRSP contributions to cover a spring camp in Barrie. I never told him. He'd have felt guilty, and a 17-year-old boy, carrying that kind of guilt, loses something he doesn't get back easily. I sold the camping trailer I'd bought with Bette this summer, before she got sick, and I told him I just wasn't using it anymore. I didn't miss a single game in 7 years. Not one. I'd come straight from job sites, still in my work gear, smelling like conduit and wire, and stand at the boards in cold arenas watching him skate. He was good. Not professional good, but good enough that his name still gets mentioned at the rink, sometimes when people talk about the players who came through. I'm telling you all of that so you understand what it cost me when I saw those photographs. It wasn't missing a hockey tournament. It was 20 years of showing up, collapsed into a text message that told me there wasn't room. My son met Monique 4 years ago. She worked in corporate communications for a firm in downtown Toronto, handled brand strategy and what she called stakeholder perception management. Intelligent, polished, the kind of person who knew exactly how a room should look before she walked into it. The first night she came to my place in Timmins, she looked around my kitchen the way someone looks at a renovation project they haven't been asked to take on yet. She touched the frame of the old photograph on the wall, Corey in his Pee-wee jersey, gap-toothed, holding a trophy, and said, "Oh, that's charming. Very authentic." She never called me Dad, not once in 4 years. Always my first name, which I won't repeat here. Always warm, always a little bit measuring. The removal happened the way these things always happen, which is not all at once. Nobody slams a door in your face. They just stop leaving it open. The first Thanksgiving after they married, I hosted, the way I always had. She mentioned very reasonably that maybe the following year they could host, give Corey a chance to build his own traditions. I said of course. The year after that, I got the invitation 3 days after everyone else had confirmed, when the guest list was already set and the turkey was already ordered, and there wasn't quite enough room at the table. Then my grandson Wyatt turned 8, and I found out about his birthday party the Monday after, when Corey mentioned it casually on the phone. "Just a small thing," he said. "Monique's family and a few neighborhood kids. Not really the kind of thing to make into a big deal." Not a big deal, my grandson's birthday. That December, I stood in my kitchen holding their Christmas card, the 3 of them in matching pajamas in front of a tree I'd never seen. And I looked for myself in the photograph before I caught myself doing it. Then I set it on the counter and didn't pick it up again. I tried once to cut through it, called Corey on a Tuesday, asked if we could get together. Just us. Drive up to Elk Lake, or even just lunch somewhere in town. There was a pause, and then the phone changed hands, smooth as anything. It's Monique. Her voice was warm and immovable, and exactly the same as always. We've been doing some work on family boundaries, and Corey really needs to protect his core unit right now. You understand, it's nothing personal. Nothing personal. I set the phone down and stood at my kitchen window, looking at the street for a long time. I want to pause here, because this next part is the one that still catches in my throat. If you've ever stood in your own kitchen, holding a Christmas card with your own family on it, and no version of yourself anywhere in the frame, then I think you already understand what I was feeling by that point. Before I go further, do one thing for me. Hit that subscribe button so stories like this one don't stay invisible. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose your own dignity over a seat at someone else's table? I'll read every single reply. Now let me tell you about Wyatt. He was 9 years old, all freckles and questions and absolutely no filter, the way children are before the world teaches them to edit themselves. He called me on his mother's old tablet every couple of weeks, just to show me things. A drawing he'd done, a Lego build he was proud of, once a dead moth he'd found in the windowsill that he was fully convinced was the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. Last January we'd made a plan. I told him that when the lake north of town froze solid, he and I were going ice fishing, real ice fishing, hand auger, jigging rod, a thermos of hot chocolate, and whatever the lake decided to give us. Not the tourist version. The real version that people up here have been doing forever. You promise, Grandpa. I promise, Bud. He kept that promise like it was his own. Brought it up every time we talked. Reminded me in October that January was coming. And when those tournament photos appeared on my Facebook feed in November, Wyatt in his helmet at center ice, the whole family in the stands, nobody having thought to let me know. The first thing I thought about was that lake, about whether they were quietly building a wall between him and it. He called me 4 days after the tournament, his face too close to the camera, the way kids always hold a phone. Grandpa, why didn't you come to my tournament? I chose my words carefully. You don't pour adult bitterness into a child's cup. I couldn't make it this time, Bud, but I heard you played a great game. He was quiet for a moment. Then he lowered his voice like he was telling me something classified. Grandpa, I heard Dad on the phone. He said you weren't allowed to come. My chest tightened. What else did you hear? Mom said you make things complicated. He looked at me. What does that mean? 9 years old carrying that. Listen to me, I said, keeping my voice flat and even. None of that is yours to sort out. I love you. Your dad loves you. This has nothing to do with you. Are you mad at me? Not possible, I said. Not now. Not ever. Not in this life. He almost smiled. Then I heard a door open somewhere behind him and a voice, calm, authoritative. Wyatt, who are you talking to? His eyes went wide. He mouthed sorry to the camera, and the screen went dark. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that, not moving, and something in me that had been patient for years quietly ran out. 3 days later, a letter came. Heavy envelope, typed address, the kind of mail that isn't a bill or a flyer. Inside was a note from a man named Cliff Beausoleil, chair of the Timmins Minor Hockey Association's anniversary committee. The association was turning 50 years old in December. They were holding a banquet at the McIntyre Arena, and wanted to recognize people who'd given significant time to minor hockey over the decades. I had coached for 22 years, Adams, Pee-wees, Bantams when they were short a bench boss. I'd also started something called the Stick Bank out of a corner of the arena equipment room, a gear exchange for families who couldn't afford new equipment so their kids could still play. I'd never mentioned it to Corey. It wasn't the kind of thing I brought up at dinner. Cliff's letter said the committee had counted 114 players over my 2 decades. It said things about my coaching that made me feel I was reading about someone else. I folded it back into the envelope and put it in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus, and I thought about declining. That night I called Angie. She lives in Dartmouth now, across the harbor from Halifax, teaches grade 4, has a little bungalow 2 blocks from the waterfront. She's the one who noticed what was happening with Corey long before I let myself see it. Tried to tell me twice, and I waved her off both times because I told myself she was being uncharitable. She picked up on the second ring. Dad, everything okay? I told her about the tournament, about Wyatt's call, About the photograph. I kept my voice level, which is a habit and a flaw of both. She was quiet for a moment. Come here for Christmas, she said. Drive down, let them have their table. You've got your own life over there. You are my life, you stubborn man. I'll have the spare room ready. I sat with that. All right, I said. Good. I could hear the relief in it. Now stop talking yourself out of things that are good for you, starting with that banquet. She'd somehow already known about the letter. I went to the banquet, McIntyre Arena on a Saturday in early December. Cliff had strung white lights along the rafters of the second concourse, set up round tables, put a podium near the Zamboni Bay. Maybe 150 people. I knew half of them. Cliff spoke for 15 minutes about the history of the association. Then he started talking about me. A man in the second row stood up. I'd coached him when he was 11, a left winger who could barely skate when he came to me. He said if it hadn't been for the stick bank, his family couldn't have kept him in the game. He was a teacher now, he said. Coached Adams on Tuesday nights. Then another man stood. Then a woman near the back who said her son runs his own electrical contracting business in North Bay and had come to me at 16 asking about the trade. And I'd spent 3 Saturday mornings walking him through what the work actually looked like. I sat with my hands folded, ears burning, wishing the floor might do me a kindness and open up. But I looked at those faces, and I thought about what Angie had said on the phone. About what it teaches a child when a good man spends his whole life making himself smaller. Cliff called me to the front. The room stood up, all of it. And that's when I saw him. Off to the left, near the coffee station, a man in a very good coat with his arms crossed, watching the room with a look I can only describe as careful recalibration. I knew who he was because Corey had shown me a photograph of him once at a company event, laughing with Monique in front of a banner. He was Monique's biggest account, a national outdoor recreation brand, hockey equipment among their lines, community arena sponsorships across the province. His name was Neville. He found me after, while people were still shaking my hand. I won't take much of your time, he said, but I have to tell you, I've been trying to build a community investment program in Northern Ontario for 2 years, and I just watched this room show me exactly why that matters. He paused. You're Corey's father, Monique's father-in-law. I am. He looked at me steadily. I've worked with Monique for 3 years. She's never once mentioned you. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Someone with a story like yours in a family like mine, he said slowly. I'd have introduced them to every single person in my professional life. A pause. I find that strange. I find it genuinely strange. He shook my hand and went back into the crowd. I stood there with a paper cup of coffee going cold, turning it over and over, feeling the ground shift, just slightly beneath someone who wasn't even in the building. I left Timmins the next morning, heading east on the Trans-Canada, Sudbury, and then north and east through the Shield. Spruce and granite on either side of the highway, the sky that flat pewter gray that Northern Ontario people know means more snow is coming. I had the phone in airplane mode. I wanted the quiet, 6 hours to think, before I had to think out loud. Somewhere north of Sudbury, I stopped for gas at a station small enough that its name isn't on any map worth consulting. I turned off airplane mode to check the weather in Halifax. The phone found signal, and then it started. Missed call, missed call, missed call. I watched the number climb on the screen. Corey, Corey, Corey. 19 missed calls from the son who had explained to me, through his wife, that what his family needed most from me was space. There was a text beneath them, sent hours earlier. Dad, please call when you can. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know. I stood in that parking lot in -22, the wind coming off the lake, and I stared at those 3 words for a long time. A truck pulled in beside me. The driver nodded, the way people nod up here, which is all the acknowledgement you need. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant. I'll be honest with you about that. Some small tired part of me did, for about 10 seconds. The part that had been cropped out of Christmas photographs and turned around in driveways and told that his presence complicated things. But it passed quickly, because underneath the number was still my son, the boy I'd watched from cold arena boards for 7 years, and he was somewhere south of me carrying something heavy. I called him back. He answered before the first ring finished. Dad, I'm here, talk to me. It came out in pieces, Neville had called Monique that morning. Hadn't accused her of anything. Men like Neville don't accuse, they simply shift. He'd mentioned the banquet, mentioned what he'd seen, mentioned that in 3 years of working together, she'd never introduced him to her father-in-law, and that he found that puzzling given what he now knew. Monique had walked out of her home office and told Corey everything, except it came out sideways the way things do when someone's been caught, with blame running ahead of accountability. And Corey, sitting at his kitchen table in Oakville, with a coffee going cold, had looked at his phone and scrolled back through 2 years of Sunday calls and last-minute cancellations and reasonable explanations. And one thing after another had clicked into place. She wrote the message, he said. The one about the tournament. She drafted it and handed me the phone and told me to read it to you out loud like it was mine. I did it, Dad. I sent it. I know. I handed her the wheel and I closed my eyes and called it trust. Son. I kept my voice steady. I'm not calling you back to have you list all of it. I called you back because you're my son and I love you. That part doesn't change. He was quiet. But I have something to ask, I said, and your answer matters more than any apology. Anything. Wyatt. I just said the name. I let it sit in the silence between us. He told me he heard you on the phone saying I wasn't allowed at the tournament, I said. He's 9 years old and he's been carrying that. I heard Corey's breath go ragged. I don't need the table back, I said. I don't need to be at every dinner or every holiday or every event. What I need is to be his grandfather freely, ice fishing in January like I promised him, calling him when I want to, not waiting for a scheduled window. I need you to stop turning me around in the driveway. That's the one thing. Yes, he said immediately. God, yes. He stopped. She's not in the house, Dad. I asked her to stay with her sister for a while we figure out what comes next. I hadn't expected that. I stood a little straighter against the wind. Come to Angie's for Christmas, I said. Both of you, if Wyatt's up for the drive, no obligations, just come if you want to. He said he'd think about it. That was enough. Angie's spare room in Dartmouth smelled like cedar and the ocean. She put a little plug-in tree on the dresser, the amber glow kind. I slept better than I had in 2 years. Christmas morning, her phone rang at 7. Corey and Wyatt on video, calling from a motel in Truro. They'd driven 11 hours through New Brunswick in the dark. Wyatt was wearing his hockey helmet for reasons he could not fully account for. His face pressed against the camera when he saw me on the screen. Grandpa, are you actually in Nova Scotia? Actually in Nova Scotia, bud. Is it cold? Cold enough. I could see my son behind him, standing in the motel doorway, looking tired and younger somehow than the last time I'd really looked at him. He raised one hand when he saw me on the screen. Not a wave exactly. Something quieter than a wave. We had Christmas dinner around Angie's little table. 5 of us. Because her neighbor came over with wine and nobody told him to leave. With a turkey that had been in the oven since before daylight. And a pie Angie made from scratch and a bowl of Brussels sprouts that Wyatt declared categorically illegal. And nobody argued with him. Corey refilled my water glass partway through dinner without being asked. It was a small thing. I think it was his way of saying something he hadn't found the words for yet. I didn't need the words. I had time. We had time. Neville didn't make a dramatic announcement. He simply redirected his company's community investment program for Northern Ontario toward direct partnerships with the local minor hockey associations, based on what he'd seen at the banquet. Monique's firm wasn't brought in for the rollout. She found out the way you find out about quiet professional decisions, through the industry newsletter, after the fact. 2 other accounts shifted in the new year. Nothing loud. Just the slow, steady consequence of a reputation built on managing perception. Once people had a chance to see the man doing the managing. I didn't celebrate it. Not one phone call, not one message. I was in Timmins by then, fixing the back window frame on my garage that had been sticking since September, and thinking about January. What I know now, at 58, that I couldn't have told you 10 years ago, is this. The peace I thought I was keeping wasn't peace. It was erasure. I kept making myself smaller and quieter and easier to manage, and I told myself I was being a good father. What I was actually doing was making myself easy to disappear. I don't do that anymore. I say what I need, calmly but plainly. I have limits now, which I would have been embarrassed to call limits before. Would have called them selfishness, or weakness, or making trouble. Turns out they're not walls that keep people away. They're just the shape that makes it possible for the right people to actually stay. Here's the thing that surprised me most. When I stopped arranging my whole life around people who found my presence inconvenient, the ones who genuinely wanted me got louder. Angie, who'd been trying to tell me for years. Wyatt, who never needed anyone's permission to love his grandfather. My son, who needed to find his own way back but got there. You are not required to make yourself small so that other people stay comfortable. You are not required to beg for room at tables where someone has already quietly decided there isn't any. I spent years believing that not asking for anything was the same as being a good person. It isn't. Sometimes it's just fear in a more respectable coat. January, the lake north of town. 2 feet of ice, under 3 inches of new snow. The sky pale and flat. The temperature sitting at -17 without a breath of wind, which is about as good as it gets up here in the middle of winter. Wyatt drilled the hole with the hand auger himself, which took 4 attempts and left him prouder than I'd seen him in a long time. We sat on our buckets with our jigging rods and the thermos of hot chocolate between us, and the lake settled into the kind of quiet that city people think is empty, but isn't. He caught a perch 20 minutes in, held it up with both hands, his whole face lit up with the shock of it. "Grandpa, we actually caught one. What did you think was going to happen?" He thought about it. "I kind of thought we'd just be cold." I laughed, all the way out. The kind of laugh that's been waiting a while. He let the fish go and watched it slip back under the ice and vanish. And he stared at the hole for a long moment, the way kids stare at something they're still processing. "Grandpa," he said finally, "I'm glad you kept your promise." I looked out over the lake, dark spruce along the far shore, the kind of sky that goes on a long way. "I told you I would, bud." "I know," he said. He picked up his rod and checked his bait with the focused seriousness of someone who had decided this was a professional endeavor. "You always do." My phone buzzed once in my chest pocket. I left it there. Whatever it was could wait. Some tables are worth driving 11 hours through a dark New Brunswick night for. Some of them are just frozen lakes north of Timmins with a 9-year-old who kept your promise alive in the back of his mind all through the months when you weren't sure anyone was keeping it at all. Either way, when you find the ones where your absence would actually be felt, where your presence is wanted and not just tolerated, hold on to them. Stop eating at the wrong tables just because you've been sitting at them long enough that leaving feels like failure. It took me 58 years to learn that. You don't have to wait that long. Before you go, leave one word in the comments, just one. Whatever word this story put in you tonight, I'll read every single one. And next week, I've got the story of a grandfather who was handed a bill for a family reunion he was never once invited to, and you will not believe who ends up footing it in the end. Check the description for that one, and a few others I think you'll want to hear. There's always room here. I'll see you in the next one.